Hey, welcome everybody. It's another time for Rowing Chat. I'm Rebecca Caro from Row Perfect, and today I'm joined by Bo Hanson. Bo, welcome to Rowing Chat.
Thank you. Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here with you today. So looking forward to our conversation.
Now, could you tell the listeners a little bit about yourself and your background in rowing and sport generally?
Yeah, my background in rowing. So I made my first Olympic team when I was 18 here in Australia and was the youngest ever to row for our country at the Olympics. That was back in 1992. I was in the men's eight. We finished fifth, and then I went on to row at the next three Olympics and won 3 medals across the quad, the four in 2000 against Sir Stephen and Matthew there, and unfortunately they're a little bit quicker than us most days, especially that day. And then in 2004 I was in the men's eight and we won another bronze medal there. And since then I've done some coaching in rowing as well, and coached in the US in the lead up to their 2012 campaign, and then have spent all of those times in between essentially doing corporate training and leadership development work. And today I spend all of my time doing work with my company called Athlete Assessments, and we work with colleges, sporting teams, both here in Australia and overseas, to try and help coaches better understand their athletes and build more effective relationships amongst the team itself. So that's how I spend my time these days.
Fantastic. It's nice to have a career that also includes sport when you're no longer an athlete.
Yeah, and that was intentional. And we still do a lot of corporate work and always looking for opportunities, but we still do a lot of that leadership development work. But we do like working with athletes, and we do like the message that you can learn from sport, especially sports like rowing, for example. It is quite unique. I've worked in 40 different sports, and rowing does teach lessons that other sports just don't teach. It's quite different, and that is a big motive, and we enjoy working with people that essentially want to maximize their performance on a daily basis, and that's always inspiring for us.
If you're speaking to an audience who are not rowers, how do you explain this difference that rowing has?
One of the big differences between rowing and other sports is the role of the coach and the level of responsibility and accountability that has to exist within a crew itself. The reality is that if you're a basketball coach, you're on the sideline, you're an active part of that game. And I coach basketball at representative level with young teams now, and I actually really enjoy coaching basketball because of that level of involvement that you can have and the impact you can have on a game. But having said that, the fact that rowing is a sport where your coach does their best preparation and they push you off the pontoon and you prepare for that race by yourself. You have to make decisions, you have to take leadership, you have to understand your team members well, and you have to take accountability for what's going to happen in that next 45 minutes, because there's that long warm-up period before you actually race, and then there's the race itself. So we find that rowing in many ways is going back to the way sport perhaps used to be when kids were growing up, and they would turn up at school and it would be 8 o'clock in the morning or 7:30 whenever their parents dropped them off, and they had the opportunity to go and play and do unstructured sport and make up their own rules and take control of what's going on. Rowing has those elements still, and I think that's part of why it is such a valuable tool to teach lessons around not just leadership, but teamwork, accountability, and a number of those other words that I've used so far. And it just is very unique in that respect.
Do you think that repels as well as attracts people?
Oh, not at all. I mean, if I probably would suggest that some of those qualities are not heavily promoted as to why someone should row. I wouldn't imagine that a parent would not be interested in any of those qualities in their children. I think about my own kids and their 2 daughters that are 10 and 12, and I'm 2 meters tall, and they're tall too, which is really great for basketball. But my oldest daughter, she's 12, and she learnt to row last year, and she can row far better than what I could. I mean, I didn't even start rowing at that age, but she can row, and I would like her to row, and I'd like them both to row, and not because I want them to row at the Olympics, but because of the qualities that rowing offers. And you know, the other thing to it too, and my daughter went rowing and in a single scull, and you know, she said that she actually enjoyed that sense of peace and harmony with the environment around her. You don't get that on a basketball court, a tennis court, a softball game, a soccer field. It's just so unique. And I think that there are, you know, I think perhaps some of those qualities could even be further promoted as a reason to row. I mean, I know a lot of coaches do talk about that, but certainly that's a big motive for us.
Now, I want to talk about a concept which is spoken about from time to time, and that's athlete toughness. What is this?
From my perspective, athlete toughness is the ability to perform in the moment when it matters the most. And today, more than ever, we talk about concepts. I mean, every coach, everyone knows that mental skills, resiliency, grit are critical components if you're going to be successful. We do a lot of work around developing toughness because the primary purpose of our work is essentially to develop a better coach-athlete relationship. That's a key performance factor, and it doesn't matter whether you are a master's rower with your coach or whether you're a young rower at school or any sport for that matter. So the coach-athlete relationship is critical. It is defined as a performance factor, and it's been proven to be one. Now, relationships within the boat are also critical within any team, and we found that whilst we were pursuing that avenue of performance in terms of those two qualities, what we found was tending to get in the way with this generation of athletes particularly is when college coaches would talk about, hey, my athletes are soft, they're not tough enough, they're not resilient, you know, they're mentally a little bit weak. And we sort of noticed that the work that we wanted to do wasn't able to be done as well as we would like because these other things were getting in the way. And so there is literally hundreds of books that have been written around developing better mental skills and everything else. I just found that most of those books, and it's fine to, you know, to be academic and theoretical and everything else, but athletes care less about theory. That's certainly what we found. And so we developed the terminology of athlete toughness. We wrote a video series and a book about it. It's 15 chapters, and it's written by an athlete for athletes and coaches. And you know, it is the specific strategies that can help you develop the quality. And toughness is, as I said, it's that ability to perform when it counts, and it's not a unique quality that only a few possess. It's something that people can learn. And I think today a lot of coaches believe that toughness is an inherent quality that you either have or you don't. But the reality is that we found is that if you can help people learn strategies, then they can develop that toughness. But importantly, we've also found this distinction is that there are a lot of coaches that teach toughness strategies. For example, you know, the ability to micro set goals. And from my experience of working now, we've worked with something like 45,000 coaches and athletes and, you know, literally thousands of teams. And I was working with one this morning. Most teams don't set goals effectively. Most athletes don't set goals effectively. And I'm talking about those micro goals. And we'll come back to this at a later topic, perhaps, when we talk about what that means for us in the rowing context in a boat. But there are strategies that just haven't been well developed. And having said that, some coaches teach strategies, but we talk about the equation of toughness. And the equation is basically understanding what we call your whys equation. So it stands for W, which is your big reason why. And that's all about what's my purpose? Why am I rowing? So I go back to why I started rowing. And initially it was because a teacher at school thought I'd be good at it. And he said, look, you're tall, come down to the rowing shed. And my brother was already doing it. So it wasn't difficult for them to take me as well. So that was fine. And I enjoyed being on the water. And as I progressed through my rowing when I was about 16 years old, I wanted to row at the Olympics. That was my big reason why. I wanted to be an Olympian, and rowing was going to be a vehicle for that. I lost every race at school. That's a true story. I did not win a single race, but I love rowing, and so that was enough. And if I enjoyed it enough, then you're willing to make whatever. I never saw them as sacrifices because I loved it. And so rowing was an enjoyable thing for me to do. I loved being on the water, the feel of the boats. So that was my big reason why, and then to go on and, you know, hopefully win a gold medal. So that's your reason why. You have to have that, and you have to stay in touch with it. The next part of the equation is what we call your identity. So do you see yourself as a tough person? So what are tough behaviors? So, you know, getting up early in the morning and the alarm goes off and you don't question it, you turn it off, you get up, you get changed, you get out the door and you get down to the facility and you start your warm up. There's no questioning things. There's no complaining about things. These are tough behaviors. And so the critical thing that we've noticed about athletes that define themselves as tough is they do see it as part of who they are. It's not just a behavior. We do talk a lot about behaviors, but toughness is an identity factor. And if you're tough in this context, you can probably be tough somewhere else. So you're tough when you turn up to a job interview and you get stumped on a question, you remain composed and you come up with a quality answer. That's the definition of toughness. And so that's the toughness piece in terms of identity. The next part is strategies, and there are literally a stack of strategies. Micro goals, reframing, the ability to emotionally manage yourself well. You know, the list goes on. So we discuss all of these strategies that will work. And the last one is a really important one because this is an equation. So it has to be W times I times S times E. And if any of the aspects of or elements of this equation are a zero, the equation doesn't work. It basically equals zero. And so the E stands for environment. And this is something which is so critical today. And one of the reasons why coaches will talk about their athletes as not being tough is because the environment that we've grown up in, especially this generation, is one which is entirely different to what previous generations have experienced. And when we say it's different, it's one which, for the most part, there's a lot of entertainment today. There's big screen TVs, there's computer games, there's other options. A lot of people today have grown up in economically pretty prosperous times, other than the last years, but even we've recovered from that to some degree. Whether it lasts is another question. And so we've become conditioned to a society where we're able to get instant answers through any search on Google. You don't have to go to the library to research things. You're able to essentially, live a more comfortable life. And there's nothing wrong with that other than the fact that comfort doesn't breed toughness. So the environment that you're in, there has to be some struggle. It's like rowing on rough water. It actually helps you. The first time that I went to row at Sydney and University of Technology at Haberfield with Tim McLaren, I couldn't believe that they actually rowed on that stuff. And I was coming from Brisbane on the Brisbane River, which had a lot of current, and I never really enjoyed that either. I really liked it when it was perfectly calm and still. But contending with Sydney Harbour ferries and private, boats that would get onto the water on the weekend, it's like I couldn't believe that you could actually row through this stuff. And I was not very good at rowing on rough water. I wasn't tough in that environment. And the fact is that unless you expose yourself to it, you're never going to be good at it. And so the environment has to have some element of obstacle, of struggle. It can't just be an environment which is always going to be conducive to giving you everything that you want. And there are a lot of environments today that are like that, where it's too easy. And as a result of that, the toughness conditioning doesn't happen. And so that's our equation. And so we wrote a book about it. And, we'd be happy, actually. We have a video series and a book and talking about a giveaway. We'd be happy to, that's a downloadable, and we can give a person access to that if you'd like to use that as part of the giveaway for this program.
Fantastic. Well, we'll come back to that at the end as well. So
sure.
Thank you. That's very generous. Let's back up a little bit to the athlete-coach relationship. Everything that happens in that relationship is grounded in how to communicate. Can you talk to us about the fundamentals of communication and how to do it?
Yeah, so just a little question there, right? So, I mean, this is a challenge. I mean, the reality is that we talk more about not so much mastering the X's and O's. You have to do that. You have to understand rigging of the boat. You have to understand conditioning. And rowing's a sport which relies heavily on biomechanics and physical conditioning. But beyond that, your ability to actually communicate with your athletes to get them to make the right technical changes is fundamental, and to keep them engaged in the sport. And we know that there are some coaches who have coaching styles, as we call it, that are quite disengaging, especially for this younger generation, to to want to listen to and be led by. And we talk about that traditional command and control style of coaching. And there is a time and a place for commanding and controlling, which we call the dominant style of coaching. But the reality is that most young people today have not grown up with that style. And as a result, they don't respond well to it.
Yeah, I definitely know that, watching parenting skills and seeing how my generation, my mum, gave us our evening meal and we ate what she gave us. And just a trite example, the current generation are asked to choose what they would like to eat.
Yeah, and there's nothing wrong with that. You know, as long as you've got the skills to make a quality decision, and the knowledge of what is going to be helpful for you. So that's one of the challenges. And look, you're not going to change that. And so the athletes that a lot of coaches are dealing with today, they too are like that, and they have more choice. And so the communication piece is really broken up into, we have a simple model for looking at that. We talk about situation, behavior, result. And so we talk about, what is the situation that you find yourself in as a coach? Who are you communicating to? When I talk about who, we're talking about, well, what's their behavioral style? So we use the DISC model. It's a globally recognized behavioral profiling tool. It's been around since the 30s. It's been continually developed, and we've further enhanced it and developed it into the world's only sporting version. And we've profiled something like 45,000 people now, and a lot of teams, a lot in America, and everything from NFL through to the top Division I college teams. And it's growing all the time. And we're looking at, well, what profile is the person that I'm talking to? Are they direct? Do they like concise information? Are they results focused? If I don't say, hey, this is what we're trying to achieve, they're not switched on to what I say next. Everybody listens selectively, and we're picking parts of the information out as we pick and choose. And it's based on the lens through which we view our life, and our profile is part of that lens. And so are they that type of style, or the I style? Are they really energetic, enthusiastic, where if you give them too much data and detail, they get really quickly not just confused, but actually disengaged with your message? Coaches that talk for too long is disengaging for another style. Coaches that don't give enough, if you like, biomechanical or stats and data feedback with their message. If things are too airy-fairy, I mean, things like that. This is the basics of communication, and knowing who you're communicating to and what the situation is. For example, in rowing, your athletes, their heart rate is often relatively high, especially when they're doing work pieces, and their ability to actually consume information is significantly limited. And so if you don't have the ability to concisely communicate, then most of your messages are going to be lost. Having said that, if you're talking about the warm-up, well, they have more ability to actually consume information there. And so you can give more specific detail. And it's the same goes for race planning, and the list goes on.
So for example, for rowing, thinking of a coxed crew,
yeah,
or coxless crew, where one person is giving the calls, particularly giving the calls in a race, the importance of having a call with very few syllables, but which has a depth of meaning which you have practiced in training, and you understand that when I say catches, this means that we will lift our hands earlier, we will try to get a backsplash, we will. There are many different interpretations, but it's condensed into a single word or a very short phrase. Does that allow an athlete under pressure with a high heart rate to absorb information better?
Yeah, that's certainly the case. And that's something else that makes rowing a unique environment, is that because your heart rate is so high and your ability to actually get words out if you're in a coxless crew is so limited, that one word has to have multiple meanings. And that will always be the case, but the challenge is that it all means the same thing to all people. And that's pretty rare. And so when we talk about being on the same page, the reality is that other teams don't compete in that type of environment, other sports, basketball or soccer or football, for example. There's more room for communication, and there's often more room for interpretation as well. Whereas when you go out onto the water, before you actually put the boat on the water, you need to have a discussion as to, this is what this means. When I say legs, it's going to mean this, this, and this. And we always work in threes, and this is a good general rule for everyone. the rule of three is we're actually conditioned to listen to things in threes. Like you talk about people give their phone number in 3 blocks of information. And so, yeah, it can't mean 100 things. It can't mean 5 things. It's got to mean maximum 3 things. And so, yeah, having those conversations is really critical. And, getting back to the situation, behavior, result model, you have to identify the situation that you're in. And that's a little bit of an art form, really. And then choose the most appropriate behavior, whether that's being direct, enthusiastic, bringing energy, being a little bit slower paced and patient, or perhaps giving data, and then seeing what the result is. So communication, the true meaning of communication is the response of the result that you get as a result of communicating. And so if the athlete doesn't understand your message, it's not about yelling louder. It's not about becoming frustrated. It's about thinking, how do I rephrase that message so that this unique individual is going to understand it? And that requires a lot of flexibility. So we always come back to, once you achieve a result, come back to what can I do about that? I can't always change the situation. I've got to change the behavior.
So broadly speaking, communication helps a crew, a team to all get on the same page, to have a common understanding and a directional purpose. So can we talk a little more detail about how people listening to this can start to practice that in their rowing and in their life, of course? So what about before you go out on the water? What things should they be looking at?
Yeah, so we have a model, and it's a pretty simple one. It's called the GRUP model, and there's numerous articles on our website which everyone can access for free, as well as videos. But the GRUP model is something that is defined as the key ingredients to ensure that your culture, your team is on the same page. And it stands for goals. And so that's a simple conversation about, right, what are we doing today? All right, what's our workout going to look like? What are the key technical points of focus that we want to improve as a crew? Okay. The next part is looking at your role. So what's my role today? And that's as simple as, okay, it's getting the boat down, it's putting the oars down, it's making sure that perhaps everyone's got their water bottle, it's making sure that the equipment is ready. There's multiple roles that people play, and it might be someone's role, if it's a coxless crew, to be the one making the calls. We all know that it's a complete disaster if you go out onto the water and everybody's talking at the same time. It does not work. Okay, so we allocate roles. And what's interesting about this is that when you understand your team members better, I know that if you're on a 4 geographically, the person sitting in 2-seat, or the bow, but mainly 2-seat, is geographically better positioned to communicate and be heard. Now, if you're in the stroke seat, doesn't mean you can't say things, but the bow is not going to hear, particularly if there are other environmental considerations. But the other thing is this, is the person who's sitting in 2-seat, do they like talking? Do they like giving instruction? Do they like actually making the calls? Because if they don't, you're making them adapt their behavior in a way which is uncomfortable for them, and they'll never be effective at it. In fact, it can even be a role which has been given to someone which is so different to how they like to naturally behave, and this is a big part of our work, that it actually distracts them from everything else that they do. I mean, people have probably had that experience where they go, oh man, this person is not a very good talker, but they're trying to, but every time they talk, they fall out of time, for example, or the boat flops around because their hands move. Being able to manage the crew and talk and give direction and row at the same time it's a skill. And you want to give that to a person who likes to do that particular job. And so there are numerous roles that could be given. The next part is the interpersonal relationships, and that's where we do talk about, do you understand the people that you're rowing with? What do you know about them? How do they like to communicate? What calls do they respond well to? Do they like to be given direct feedback, or do they prefer a really encouraging atmosphere within the boat? Or do they like a lot of quiet? And, the best thing to do is to not make many calls at all, but just talk about the key points when you spin around at the halfway point. And then the final part of this is processes and procedures. Now, in a rowing boat, this is really important. How many arguments happen as a result of the way you spin the boat around? Are we going to take full strokes, forwards, backwards? Are we just going to tap it? Okay, which side are we going to spin to? Who's going to make that decision? Which side of the river do we need to be on? Okay, are we going to come up this side or this side? So they are all processes, as well as just what time do we turn up? A lot of this goes unspoken, and when you don't set a framework, there's a great philosophy around quantum physics which talks about the importance of the first 15%. And total quality management, for example, is all about getting that initial framework in place so that everything else can flow as a result of that. And so the processes around, we used to talk about if you're on time, you're late. And so we would say that, right, you have to be early. And so that means that, okay, what time is the boat leaving the pontoon? Well, it's going to be 5:15. Okay, so if it's 5:15, what time do we turn up? Well, you need to be there at 5:45. Okay, we're going to have a warm up, and then we're going to talk about this, then we're going to get everything organized, and we're going to get ready. And so they're all processes. And if you don't talk about that stuff, let alone what you're going to wear, and are you all going to wear the same thing? And how are you going to set the oars up on the pontoon? One person might be really clean and tidy and neat. There's a certain profile that will set the oars up perfectly. And if you look at that and go, oh my gosh, I can't believe you're taking that time to do that. And so all of this understanding, and we know that the little things are the big things.
So true. So a good example of the little things are the big things are that when you have a routine that perhaps, as you say, someone always sets the oars up neatly in pairs for a sculling crew with the numbers facing upwards so you can easily find your pair of oars for your seat. It means that when you are under pressure, you don't have to think about it. It becomes automatic.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And the better we can, if you like, create effective processes which are suitable for our crew, that also becomes part of your crew's identity. And, people notice togetherness. And, I think it's really important that once those processes are in place, that's someone else's role to make sure that those processes are adhered to. And that's why it's difficult, and that becomes the culture of your team. And that's why it's hard when you get a new crew member come and they do things different. And if they're really dominant in their style, they try to change things in your crew, and that creates conflict. And we all know that conflict in a rowing boat, there's not a lot of room for it because of the degree to which you have to be in synchronization and you have to be synergistic, or at least be aspiring to get to that level of synergy, which is pretty rare.
So I've got a quick question, which is there a place for swapping roles around sometimes? I'm suspecting that this is in training, not in racing, in order to have a slightly different experience?
Look, we would do that, and we certainly would change sides that we would row for physical reasons as well as just mental challenge reasons. But, I've also had the experience of being in a crew where our roles were fundamentally changed, and yeah, we agreed for that to happen. And at the time probably didn't appreciate the significance of how that meant certain members of the team adapted their behaviors in ways which were fundamentally uncomfortable. And my advice is that once you've defined what your role is, sure, you can mix it up a little bit just to give other people a learning experience. But ultimately, that's what helps make a great crew is strong role clarification and a clear understanding as to how I make a contribution to the boat.
So when you've got conflict in a crew, what is a good place to start to resolve conflict? Because conflict risks disintegration, and generally speaking, most people want the crew to stay together, at least until the destination, which may be a race or it might be the Olympic Games. But how do you resolve conflict?
Yeah, I mean, the key way for me to resolve conflict is always to come back to what's the point of commonality. And the point of commonality a lot of the time should be, well, what's the goal that we're trying to achieve as a crew? And if it's to make it to the next regatta and at the end of the season, is everyone still strongly attached to that goal? I mean, the reality is that some conflicts are simply little behavioral clashes. We don't call them personality clashes because you can't change your personality. So that's really not a useful way to think about it. So you have to define, well, what is the conflict? If it's a behavioral clash, I want to do it this way, you want to do it this way. well, I'm not going to compromise, and you're not going to compromise, because that's not effective, really. True conflict resolution is looking at what's best for the boat. What is the best outcome for the boat? And we will have that conversation. Or what's the best outcome for the team? And that may mean that we do it your way, because that's what's going to suit the team best. Or it may mean we do it my way, or it may mean neither of us are going to get it done our way, because that's not going to be effective for the result that we want to achieve as a crew. So behavioral clashes should happen, because all of you are different. And we find that diversity actually creates better results, not just sometimes, but every time. Of all of the teams we work with, when they lack diversity, teams that lack diversity are never successful, or maybe just once or twice. And certain profiles within the boat in the wrong position, it's essentially a guarantee they're not going to work. Or if they will, they'll only work for a short amount of time before people start showing their true colors, and that creates its own set of clashes. So that's the first step in resolving conflict, is looking at what's our point of commonality, what's our common goal, what's best for the boat. If it's a values clash, and that's going deeper, if it's something philosophically that you believe is different to some of the other members of your team, that's where you need to have a more serious conversation as to whether that can be reconciled. One of the things that we do to help, if you like, ensure that conflict doesn't happen in the first place, is to set a clear framework. When I gave you that GRUP process before, the goals part goes a little bit deeper, and we talk about, well, what are the values that our crew aspires to? So how do we want to identify ourselves, if you like? And so a football team that I worked with this year, their values were AST, accountability, sacrifice, and trust. And so at the beginning of their season, they went on to win the championship in the States, Division 1 football team. And accountability means you see something, you say something. And so that's going to be an acceptable behavior in this crew. So that means that if the boat's not running correctly, I'm going to say something, especially if it's my role to make that call. And if it's not, it has to be acceptable for someone to say, hey, this is not going the way that I'd like. I think we need to do this. Or, hey, you turned up late today. Remember, we got to be on time, because we got to get on the water, get ahead of the other crews, etc., etc. So you set a standard of behaviors at the very, very beginning. Now that gives people the opportunity to either buy in or go race somewhere else. And either way is a good decision. If we come up with this set of values and you don't want to live those values, then you probably shouldn't be in the boat with us. I mean, by the time I got to my end of my career, there's a handful of people that you want to row with at the highest level, because you know that philosophically, values-wise, you are all on the same page. And behaviorally, you're different, but values-wise, you're all connected. And so, again, conflict often arises because people don't have those conversations, and there's no framework.
So what's your preferred role in a boat?
I was always good at giving direction. That suits my role today. It suits how I spend all of my time. I'm not overly social. I never rowed to make friends. I do have very good friends. The guys that I rowed with back in the very first crew that I made for a national team in my junior years is still my best friends today. And I'm in touch with most, if not all, at some stage, especially via social media, all of the guys that I rowed with throughout my career. So it's a byproduct for me, though. I was rowing because I wanted to win a gold medal at the Olympics. It never happened, and that's disappointing. But you can live with that if you give everything you had to give, and certainly that was the case with me. And sometimes all the time, you're not in total control of the result. And so I was to learn later on that the relationships and the relationship with your coach is, Tim is now a great friend of mine. That rowing creates those unique bonds that you wouldn't otherwise create, I don't think, in perhaps any other sport. And so that was yeah. So my role was I stroked a lot of boats. I don't think I was a great stroke. There are other guys who had better feel than I did, but I had a great work ethic, and I was good at supporting others. I was good at giving direction. I was good at keeping people on the same page and providing some of that leadership. So I typically gravitated towards those roles.
So were you the peacemaker?
I wasn't the peacemaker, no. No. I created my fair share of conflict, because if you're trying to win a gold medal and the standard is not what it needs to be, I was quite happy to call that out. And that's a role that someone has to play. Otherwise, you settle for mediocrity, and that was not why I was there. There were other guys that would be good at sort of smoothing things out and making sure that the relationships within the crew were strong, or planning fun things to do. There were guys that brought energy and humor and enthusiasm to the boat. And one of the guys I rowed with who taught me about how important it is to enjoy just the moments and to focus on the moment and what the boat feels like. And that was a skill that I later developed. And once you work that out, the sport actually becomes as easy as it can be. It's always going to be a hard sport, but when you work it out, and I think there are quite a few people that do work it out, you know how to move the boat, and suddenly it's a whole new sport.
Let's talk about your Olympic final in your presumably last race. I watched that race. Were you all out racing the British crew, or were the Italians part of your focus?
Yeah, I know the British crew is our purely our. It's either going to be a gold medal or whatever else. I mean, I was good friends with the Italian guys, and they were a little bit the same. So everyone was gunning for that gold medal in that race, and there wasn't a lot in it. But having said that, we did everything we could to come out a little bit quicker than what we would normally come out, because the British crew is a crew that loves to race in front. And the thing is that we were not that quick out of the start. And we changed a couple of things to get a little bit quicker out of the start. And even the thing was, even though we came out quicker, the British crew still came out quicker. And so they were, I mean, that's the reality there, is that I would absolutely say the greatest, four that has ever been put on the water, no question. The way that they rode over so many years, and the makeup of that team. So when you think that you got beaten by a crew like that, well, that's fine. It's 1.37 seconds, and they beat the Italians by 0.8. So I vividly remember those numbers. And I know the Italian stroke Carlo Minardi, chatting to him about it as well, is that he still was undecided whether they won the silver or lost the gold. I mean, I think the reality is that the best crew won that day. They were proven in that combination for a long period of time, and we're an exceptional crew, and crews like that don't come around very often.
Very true. Now, in that particular race, was there a moment, a turning point, where something significant changed that, on reflection, you can identify?
It's interesting when I watch that race back. You think about not winning the gold medal, and then you see how close fourth place was as well. Fourth was not far behind us, and you think, oh wow, okay, you've got to be thankful for what you ended up with, because fourth would have been a disaster, and bronze was not great, but fourth would have been a complete disaster, and that would have been difficult to sort of reconcile. And so, I mean, during the race, I mean, I remember that race really well, but the thing was that it was a massive build-up, being a home Olympics, and it's something that you'd imagined a lot of times, maybe even too many times, and it was almost surreal that you're actually doing it, but you're in the moment. And I remember the boat was pretty good. It wasn't our greatest ever rode together, but the fact is that when you go into a race knowing that you need to have, like, the four of you need to connect on a level that you've never ever connected on before, in terms of a race like that, where you have to be as the absolute best that you can possibly be, and then you've got a chance. That's a lot to ask in an Olympic final. And the reality is what's this point something of a percent difference between first, second, and third. And that's what's exciting about sport. It's what's difficult about it, and the fact that you have to be 100%. Whereas maybe for the British, I mean, I know there's a great quote from Sir Stephen Redgrave about the '98 final at the World Championships where they won. We came fourth in a photo finish for second, third, and fourth. There was a foot in it. And he said, today wasn't great. We still won, but today wasn't great. We train like we do so that we can essentially win when we're not at our best. And for a crew, and I think they still rode 5:47 or something like that day. And so for a crew to be that good, it's pretty exceptional.
For sure. I want to come back to crews that our listeners are coaching or rowing in, and focus a little bit about setting up a new crew or integrating a new member or members into an existing training group. How should people approach this?
Well, I think firstly, you need to have people some coaches would firstly look at the physicality of those people that are going to make up that crew. However, today I would be focusing more on, is this a group of people that all have a similar objective as to why they're rowing, as to what they want to take away from the sport, and into the timeframes that they want to commit to it. And if our expectations at that point are not aligned, it doesn't really matter how physically capable they are. You're simply not going to get good results. And so having people aligned in that way is really critical. Do they like to hang around each other outside of the sport? Are there points of commonality there? I think that helps to have a more enjoyable experience as well. And I think that once you have those things in place, then you can start looking at perhaps if you've got the luxury anyway, a lot of teams is just whoever turns up. But if you've got the luxury then of working out, well, how are you going to physically allocate people roles in the boat from a technical perspective in terms of what seat they're going to actually occupy, and then start looking at, what qualities do they bring to the boat beyond just their technical skills that can add value. So is this person really encouraging? Does this person like giving direction? And then start taking that into account and putting them in positions where they can behave that way. That would be the starting points for me. And, I would think that a lot of coaches probably go through some sort of process like that. I mean, I coach teams now where, it's whoever turns up, and that's a lot of kids' sport. And I think that provides an additional set of challenges. But certainly at some levels, you want to be able to pick and choose.
And integrating a new person into an existing crew when you don't know them at all, how do you start that?
Yeah, I think that you have to be careful who you choose to integrate for starters. I rode with guys that were very integratable, basically. They were very malleable, and their profile was such that they were able to row with anyone. Not always add speed to the boat, because if they could, they would be in it by themselves. But people that were selfless, people that wanted to, fit in with the existing rhythm instead of getting to the boat and change it is really critical. So you have to choose whether that person is going to be like that, or whether they're going to really try and dominate and make adjustments to what you've already established is a big issue. So looking at those qualities is critical. If you choose to go with that person, I would be making sure that there is agreement amongst all the other crew members, that it's not just the coach's decision. And then if there is agreement, making sure that you try to induct them into, as we said before, that GRUP model. So what are the goals of this crew, and what are the values, and what are our standards of behavior, and what are our expectations in terms of those processes, and ultimately help them understand the rest of the team. It's not just, hey, jump in and let's go.
Being a team is really important for rowing, but it's also a really useful life skill. What are the strategies that you recommend, or the tactics that people can learn that can help to form effective teams?
I think the key strategies there is to recognize that, being an effective team is about developing productive relationships with other people. And it is about learning how to adapt, and obviously not always getting things the way that you want to get things done. And so it's that choice, that philosophical choice that if you're rowing, you are giving to the boat. And there's no individual in rowing. And I think that's what makes the sport so unique, is that there's no individual stats. You think of most other sports, especially today where they're tracking so many metrics, is that there's individual stats for everyone. And it would be a shame to ever see rowing go down that path if they wanted to put all the equipment. I know we can do it biomechanically and that serves a purpose, that's important. But you live and die by the team result. And, you know, for some people who may come to rowing later in life, that might be refreshing. For others, it might be hard, because a lot of how we go through society is fairly individual. And you can measure culture along a scale of individualism versus collectivism. Rowing, it has to be a collective. And for some people, that's quite a departure. And what that means is often leaving your ego behind. And it means sometimes, you know, basically allowing others to step into the limelight, allowing others to play a role which might be, you know, more significant in terms of the recognition that they get than what you might get. And you have to be accepting of that. And that's part of the challenge, is that sometimes for you to be a good team member, it means that you have to almost give up some of those things that may be a little bit important to you for the sake of the team achieving a result, which means a lot to you. But it's that ability to adapt. And sometimes you can't do that for a long period of time. So you think about an Olympic preparation where you might have to row with someone that, you know, maybe they're probably not your best friend. You may have raced against them all year. You may not be that aligned in other ways. But again, it's making the adaptations, coming together for a period of time in order to prepare for the games or a major event, and being willing to, again, give up some of the things that might be a bit important to you for the sake of the greater good. And that willingness to do that, that's pretty unique. So I think that's part of what makes a great team member. We have a quote, and basically the quote is, it's about being the best person for the boat instead of the best person in the boat. That's fundamentally different philosophy.
Very nice. Now, thinking then about skills to work effectively together, how can a crew start to develop those skills?
Well, I think the first thing is recognizing that there is difference within the boat, and that difference can be, I mean, that's the fundamental aspect of the work that we do, is people do a behavioral profile and you can see that, hey, I'm different to you. And is that positive? Is that negative? A lot of people are conditioned to see difference as being negative. We see it as a positive. We see the fact that, hey, you're really detail oriented and you love to keep things clean and you're very structured and you're very well organized and you make sure that the boat is perfectly set up. I'm not really that fussed about that, but I'm really glad you're into it and I'll help you, but you can take the lead on that. You could see that as frustrating because it takes them a long time to get ready. But as soon as you start to see that that behavior helps the team, because their goal is to, for example, win this race, and one of the ways that they like to win the race is by being well prepared so there's no equipment malfunctions. And so as soon as you start to see the behavior, even if it's different to yours, as a behavior which adds value, so that means you value the behaviors of others, that's when you get great team chemistry. Great team chemistry is not just a function of, hey, we really like each other, we hang out together for coffee afterwards, we get on well. Sometimes they can be the least effective crews of all, because people feel like, because we have great friendships, if I give you direct feedback, or if I hold you accountable, or if I hold myself accountable and you give me feedback, maybe that's going to damage the relationship. And so you can have too much harmony and not enough honesty. So if you value harmony over honesty, you're never going to go fast. And so again, you know, it's learning about those qualities and seeing where you're similar, seeing where you're different, and learning to value those differences in terms of how they actually add speed to the boat. And
most of that comes with straightforward dialogue and discussion.
Yeah, I mean, again, though, you can do the profile and it'll tell you all of that stuff straight away. It'll shortcut years of getting to know someone. But you can discuss these things, and I think they're healthy discussions to have.
Fabulous. My last focus for our chat is around racing. Now, racing is a very particular, peculiar part of our sport. We do very little of it. We often do competitive training. What can a crew do for race preparation and particularly race planning in order to be effective as a team?
Yeah, I think the race planning concept is an interesting one, and something that I helped and developed and discussed with my coach Tim, and we came up with a strategy around what information are you likely to be able to receive at what part of the race. And so having those key focus points and how you break the race down into its micro, sections is really, really critical. In general terms, the beginning of the race, obviously, once you find some rhythm, but the beginning of the race, you're more adept at being able to take on board technical cues. Your brain is functioning at a level where, it's still able to take on board those thought processes. So you can have more technical cues at the very beginning. Through the 500 up to the middle 1,000 of the race, as your body starts to become fatigued and managing the whole, lactate production is difficult, and there's pain associated with that. Your emotional cues have to really step in, and so we don't talk about fine motor skills through the last half of the race. The calls get more emotive, more aggressive, and more, if you like, fundamental and basic. And that has to be expressed through your tone of voice as well. There's few things worse than having a coxswain who sounds really composed and, very theoretical and, analytical through the dying stages of the race. Your emotions have to rise with the occasion. On top of that, one thing which is unique about rowing as opposed to a lot of other sports is that the physical pain that you experience is significant, and you'd be hard pressed to find another sport. I mean, some running, certainly the case, but other sports where you hit the finish line, and you are not physically capable of taking more strokes. And so the thing is that how do you keep your mind on track? And this is another aspect of the toughness equation, is that working around that circle to keep your mind distracted from the massive message which is being sent by your body that you should stop. And the only way we found that is effective in doing that, and this is why race planning is so important, is that we used to talk about working around the circle. And the rowing stroke is a cycle or a circle, and you can start anywhere you like. And if you were to start at the catch, that means we've got 5 to 10 strokes focusing on the catch, or 15 at a maximum. If it's too many, people drift off again. So focus on the catch. Let's feel the grip, for example, in our hands or our fingers. Then let's feel our connection with the seat. And then you might be focusing on what the legs are pushing like as a crew. That's the next 10 or 15. And then you're focusing on that, perhaps that swing of your body through the middle of the stroke. Then you might be focusing on the sit back and releasing together. And then you're moving on to the next part, to the next part, to the next part. And you keep working around that circle. And so working around the circle gives you the ability to constantly have your focus directed in a productive way. Because every single listener, if they've rowed a rowing race at a high level, or even if they haven't been fit when they've been rowing, they will have multiple thoughts come into their mind about things that are unproductive. And that's why you come back to, what's your big reason why? If you don't have a big reason why, rowing's too hard. Basketball is really fun to play. And you run up and down the court, and you can even take a little rest. But it's fun. Rowing's fun, but it's not fun in the same way. It's not fun to row in a boat which is flopping from side to side, where you can't get your oar out, where the timing is poor. Rowing is fun when it's done at a level where the boat is moving nicely through the water. That's the fun part of rowing. Basketball can be fun played at a low level. Soccer the same, and cricket, etc. Rowing's different. So you have to do these things well. And having those points of focus really is critical as you're progressing through the race.
And agreeing them ahead of time?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So careful planning.
Yeah, there's not much room for arguing, is there? Although it does happen. It does happen when someone starts making some bizarre calls and you think, oh, where did that come from? And you have to go with it at the time, and you can discuss it later, but you want to try and avoid those moments, that's for sure. Or you're happy to hit them in the boat beside you.
I just published a book called RowingChat, which is a collection of anecdotes and tales from people who are rowers. And one of them is your old mate, Drew Ginn. And Drew told us the story of his first Olympic final in the fall. And he was asked to do the calls quite late in the day. And he said he got to 2/3 of the way through the race. And he said, I don't know why, but I decided to tell the crew where our relative position was to the other crews. He said that was part of the plan. But my brain then started to give a commentary as if I was on the bank about the other crews. And he said,
yeah, well, he does like to talk, Jury. That's one thing. So they probably gave it to the right person there, yeah. And
he got let rip very quickly and told to shut the F up.
Yeah, I'm sure Mick would have told him that in no uncertain terms. So he can communicate pretty directly, Mike.
And in an Olympic final, I'd say that's probably appropriate.
Yeah, I would agree.
Now, a few times you've mentioned Tim McLaren. He's obviously a very important person in your life. And I'd love, Tim will hate this, but let's do it anyway. I'd love you to tell us a little bit about what it was like working with him as a coach-athlete relationship.
Well, I mean, the reality is that Tim inspired the work that we do today, and he knows that. And, you know, he was an example of someone who's able to build phenomenal relationships with all of the athletes that he coached. We often anecdotally will measure the relationship quality of a coach by how many weddings and, you know, how often you get notified that your athletes are having a baby with their partner or whatever the case might be. And, you know, he gets invited to more weddings than anyone that I know as these young athletes get older, and he certainly came to ours and all the other guys in my crew and every other crew that he coaches. So he's always late to those weddings, mind you, but he does get there, and he's always late because he's been coaching all day usually. But the point is that, you know, you don't invite people to that part of your life unless you've developed a really strong relationship with them. And so that's one of the greatest qualities that Tim has, is his ability to do that. And he does it in his own unique way. And, you know, so I learned so much from him about that. And, you know, there's no denying his technical knowledge of the sport is phenomenal. And, you know, I think that his ability to innovate is extraordinary. And ultimately, when you're turning up as an athlete every morning at whatever time it might be and doing your 16 sessions a week and everything else, and you see your coach is actually there before you and is going home after you and is researching every method he can find to maximize your performance, you know, it's what that makes it possible for you to do is aspire to a higher standard yourself. And, you know, he was like that. You know, he never settled, and he still is always trying to do things a little bit differently and trying to keep on improving. So, you know, they're all really inspirational things to see from your coach.
They certainly are. Give us an example of an innovation that you experienced with Tim.
Oh, it's the work that Tim does even today, the work that he's doing on the actual the oar locks and the gates, and there's the work that he did all through the years with the Croker family around, you know, designing and developing the shape of the blade and the flex of the blade and the hydrodynamic design of certain fins and, you know, single membrane, you know, rudders, and, you know, how he could innovate your position in the boat in terms of the biomechanics of that. And his ability to make unique adjustments for every single athlete's. If you look at his 92 crew that won the gold medal in the double scull, the way they rode they rode that way because that's their body shape. And, you know, the time that they all needed to spend in the water and how they adjusted the way that they pushed their legs and opened their body as a result of that, trying to achieve that time in the water, because they're pretty small guys, you know, height-wise, massive heart and determination and toughness, but not physically big guys. And so he would customize the way you rode based on your shape. And not many coaches are like that. You know, most have a model that they want to subscribe to, and away you go. Whereas he's not like that. And he has an incredible eye. He sees things that other coaches just won't see, and he has this ability to continue to see deeply into the crew, despite the fact that he looks at them every single day. Most people are not like that. You stop seeing things the more you look at it, whereas he starts seeing even deeper.
That's a fantastic tribute to Tim and a great insight into part of the hidden depths of a really successful coach and coaching relationship. Bo, it's been an absolute delight having you. Thank you for your extreme generosity, sharing your knowledge and imparting insights that we can now all take away and use ourselves. Again, just to reiterate, you were going to give us a link to the article giveaway, and I'll put that in the show notes. Thank you again from the bottom of our hearts. You've been brilliant.
Oh, it's a pleasure. Yeah, it's always good to talk to rowing people, so you know that. And you know, at the end of the day, rowers can talk for a long time about rowing, right? You wouldn't think so. It's a 5.5 minute race or whatever, but anyway.
Indeed. That was my inspiration for the Rowing Tales book. Yeah. Everyone has a rowing story to tell.
Yeah, that's right.
Thank you very much.